everybody. Welcome to Perpetual Motion, a podcast about current trends, communication, wellness, and relationships. I'm the host, Dr. Mo Anderson, and my goal is to help you stress less, produce more, and love the ones you're with. Today, my special guest is the Marathon Man. And no, I am not referring to that 1976 movie starring Dustin Hoffman, Boomers. Instead, this Marathon Man is Tony Reed, who has the distinction of being the first Black in the world, yes, I said in the world, to run a marathon on all 7 continents. His life story is a made-for-TV movie, so get comfortable, turn the volume up, and prepare to be amazed.
You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies the consequences of failure. What are you scared of? Why are you afraid? I'd rather live like I'm dying than live to die. Any day, my heart is pure, my soul is safe. Enlighten our sisters and brothers, how would you open still undercovers?
I am so excited to have Mr. Tony Reed join me today. Welcome to the show, Tony.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Been looking forward to this interview. You have such an amazing life story. You've had such an amazing career in the running industry as an athlete, but you grew up in St. Louis, right?
Yes, I did. I grew up in St. Louis and for a while lived in the Blue Mire projects there in St. Louis.
And now started from the bottom, now you're here. And no shade on the Blue Mire projects, but you have come a long way from there. And I recently read an article. You've been featured in a lot of publications, but you were featured in Runner's World, and they talked about an experience you had going back to the old neighborhood running. And so I'd like for you to share that because I really related to that story.
Yes, so I left St. Louis in 1978 and didn't really return to running any races until around 2004. And went there to run the St. Louis Marathon, and I didn't know what the course looks like or where it was going to run. And I looked up and it ran right by the area where the Blue Mire projects originally stood. So these were 10 and 12 story projects, and they have since torn them down and put the 2 to 3 story family units there. And as I was running by that area, some Black kids were sitting on the curb and they saw me running. And so they decided to get up and kind of run along with me for about a block. And that was, for me, really inspirational because it didn't occur to me that those kids seeing me, that I was a role model for them. Mm-hmm. And I realized also that it would be good to create an environment in which other people can serve as role models for youth. But for me, it was really, truly inspirational, just running along with the kids and talking with them.
That sounds like a really great experience. And I'm happy that you got to have it, and more so that the kids got to have it. So many people say, I'm not a role model, but it's not really something you choose. It's not a label. You just say, I'm going to be a role model today. But when you're in the public, you may be positive or negative, but you are modeling behavior. So I'm so glad that those kids got to see someone who looked like them doing what you're doing. What prompted you to begin running in the first place? What happened with that?
Well, when I lived in St. Louis, I was around 8 years old and I was diagnosed with a pre-diabetic condition. And the doctor said that I would go on insulin by the time I was a teenager. So imagine being 8 years old and you're suddenly being told you can't have anything sweet to eat. And that's when you're just developing that sweet tooth. So
right, that's not about 8 years old. That would hurt me now.
So I ended up going to a high school in St. Louis who was mandatory that you participate in sport. And subsequently, I ended up losing weight. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, I didn't have to go on insulin at that time. In college, we read a book by Dr. Kenneth Cooper called Aerobics. And in the book, there was a paragraph in there that stated diabetics who are dependent on insulin could either decrease their insulin intake or go completely off of it if they maintained a fitness program. So that was the first time I read anything where they were talking about a connection between being healthy and fit and diabetes. So with that, I set a lifetime goal of averaging 3 miles a day of running, walking, or crawling. I've kept running journals since 1979.
Oh, so disciplined, so disciplined. I love it.
Earlier this year, I logged my 47,000th mile.
Oh, wow.
And I've averaged exactly 3 miles a day. And just turned 66 and I'm still not on insulin.
And I'll have to post a picture of you as we promote this, because you don't look anything like 66. You look amazing, very, very fit. And I commend you. 3 miles a day. I mean, with my Fitbit, I struggle to get 10,000 steps a day, let alone 3 miles. So that is quite impressive. And, Dr. Cooper, well known in sports medicine, and that advice holds true to this day. And I know that you share that a lot, but I just want to reiterate that, exercise movement really offsets a lot of diseases, not just obesity. So that's great that you're sharing that message. And so you're running 3 miles a day, you're keeping your journal, and then you decide, hey, I'm going to do a marathon. I'm sure it wasn't that abrupt, but you did your first marathon in 1982 in my hometown, Fort Worth, Texas, the Cowtown Marathon. What was that like? I'm sure you still remember your very first marathon.
Oh, yes. I distinctly remember standing in the starting line area, and there were only about 5 blacks in the race. And the white gentleman around me who didn't know anything about me started saying that I looked too big to run a marathon and that I probably really shouldn't do it. So I'm built more like a running back than I am a distance runner. But these guys didn't know anything at all about my training. They didn't know the amount of miles that I put in. At that time, they said, if you can't run a marathon in under 4 hours, you shouldn't even be in the race. So I ended up running a marathon in under 4 hours. Interestingly enough, the race was won by a black man from Fort Worth named Ricky Cox.
Okay.
And he went on to be a 3-time winner of the Cowtown Marathon. So it's interesting, with Ricky winning the race, I came away from it with an understanding that it's normal for African Americans to win marathons.
Right. We weren't seeing a lot of, at that time, we were not seeing a lot of African Americans as distance runners. There were sprinters and hurdlers and long jumpers, high jumpers, but not as distant runners who were African American. Now, we're accustomed to that from Africa, but I know exactly what you're saying. But I have a couple of follow-up questions from that Cowtown Marathon. As well as you can remember, you mentioned 5 blacks, but how many total runners were there?
There were a total of about, I believe, around 400 runners.
Oh my goodness. That's a very small percentage indeed.
Yes. Well, also at the starting line, I actually had my personal running role model, and that was Dick Gregory. Yeah, a lot of people didn't realize that Dick Gregory was a star athlete in cross country and track in high school and in college. Mm-hmm. And in 1976, he ran from LA to New York and averaged 41 miles a day. So I was telling myself, if Dick Gregory can win 41 miles a day for I don't know how many days in a row, what's 26.2 miles in just one day? Right.
You told yourself that. And a wonderful gentleman, I had an opportunity actually to bowl with him, Cheryl Smith, a journalism person over in Dallas, was a good friend of his, and she would have these celebrity bowl-a-thons. So very versatile man, and funny as all heck. A lot of people just knew him as a comedian, really. And so that I love that story, because I had forgotten that I knew he was very health conscious, but I had forgotten that he ran, and certainly didn't know that he was running to that extent. Like you said, just having those mentors and role models in any way can be life-changing. It's hard to imagine becoming something you've never seen. And that's why I'm really excited to have you here, because I know you're famous in a lot of circles, but I don't think everybody knows just what you've accomplished. To that point, as I said, you have the distinction of being the first Black in the world to run a marathon on all 7 continents. And that happened in 2007. What was that 7th continent, and what was the environment? I mean, were people anticipating? Did they know this was going to be a record-breaking, milestone, iconic kind of thing?
Well, actually, about 3 months before that marathon, I was running a marathon down in Antarctica. And the race director told me that there had only been 2 other Blacks who had ever run a marathon down in Antarctica. And I asked him, have any of them finished marathons on the 7 continents? And he said, no. So with that knowledge, I said, well, let me go ahead and finish Antarctica, then ran a marathon in South America the week after I finished the one in Antarctica. So that was in February and March, and then signed up to run an African marathon in June, which was a 7th continent.
Oh, I love that.
So that race was really interesting because it was run at a high altitude. It was around 5,200 feet. The air up there was very dry, and the race was run inside of a game reserve. So there were animals roaming free during the race.
Oh my.
The day before the race, we toured the course. We saw rhinos on the side of the marathon course, cheetahs, and other animals. And these animals were not going to be locked up during the race. So we were in their territory. They weren't racing a petting zoo and set loose. I mean, this was their home.
Wow.
And I had never been so scared in my life.
I can imagine. So instead of, oh my, I should have said lions and tigers and bears, oh my, because to have the safari without the Jeep, I can't even imagine. And you're running too, getting their attention.
Well, the crazy part too is whenever we would come to an aid station, where they would give us water and things, the aid stations were protected by guys with automatic weapons. That's the only time I felt safe during the entire race.
I bet you had a heck of a speed though, because I would have been getting from one station to the next with a quickness.
Well, I ran the marathon with a gentleman who was about my age, and he was, I think he was a little bit slower than I was, because my thing was, you only have to beat one person in a sprint if an animal is chasing you. So my whole thing was always to save up as much energy as I could. So if something did happen, I could take off running as fast as I could and hopefully outrun him.
Understood. You and me. So the slowest man loses literally in so many senses in that example. So now it sounds like you didn't originally plan to run in all 7 continents from what you were saying with the question you asked in Antarctica. Did you decide after hearing that these other runners hadn't run in every continent? Was that what made you determined to do that?
Well, I had decided to run all 7 continents actually on my 50th birthday.
Okay.
I had always wanted to run a marathon on my birthday. And at that time, there were only 2 marathons in the world that were held on my birthday: the Leadville, Colorado Marathon and the Gold Coast Marathon in Australia. So I opted to go down to Australia. And while I was down in Australia running the marathon, that's when I decided I was going to go ahead and run marathons on all 7 continents. But when I was in Antarctica, my original plan was to finish up to 7 continents the next year. So just telling me that there were 2 other brothers who had run Antarctica and they had not finished 7 continents really had my wheels spinning. Says, well, you only sometimes have one opportunity in life. And either you could sit there and, years later wish that you had done something, or go ahead and take the bull by the horns and pursue it.
Absolutely. That's tweetable right there. You took the bulls by the horn big time. And I am so proud of you for doing so. When you run in different places on different continents, what is the difference between, if any, running international races and running in the United States? Because I think you run in all 50 states, right?
Yes, I have.
In the United States, in addition to all of the continents. Is there any difference between those, or do you just feel more comfortable in the US, or is it just all?
It's almost all alike. I mean, I enjoy traveling, And even when I'm not running a marathon, the first thing I'll do is the next morning after I get someplace, I put on my shoes and go for a run. Ironically, the biggest changes or challenges I had was when I was running in Tanzania and when I was running down in Australia, because they drive on the opposite side of the road,
Right.
and people also walk on kind of the opposite side. If you can imagine, when you're walking down the sidewalk here, we walk on the right-hand side, so to speak, the same side that we drive on. So I was always kind of running on the incorrect side and kept kind of bumping into people. And before it finally occurred to me, wait a minute, they're doing this the opposite way.
That's interesting. I never really thought about that. Yeah.
But people are, they're very friendly, very open. So to me, it's a lot of fun.
I can hear that it's fun, that you're very passionate about it, but you've also worked really hard to make sure that they're not just, 5 Blacks in a race. Now, you've done a lot to build the inclusion and diversity in the sport. And toward that end, you actually started an association for Black marathoners. Tell us about that work.
2004, Charlotte Simmons and I formed the National Black Marathoners Association. So now, even though we have the word marathon in our title, it has always been open to all runners, whether they run 1 mile or 100 miles. And we've been around since, like I said, since 2004. We started with just 2 people, and now we have over 16,000 members around the U.S. and in around 5 different countries. So we have kind of 4 objectives. One is to encourage African Americans to pursue a healthy lifestyle through distance running and walking. We also try to get as many Black runners as we can to congregate together once a year at a race around the country. And at those races, there's usually a marathon, a half marathon, a 5K, and a 10K. So there's something for the entire family. We also provide scholarships to African American distance runners. And so far, we've awarded over $50,000 in college scholarships to those students.
Awesome.
And last but not least, we also wanted to recognize the accomplishments of African American distance runners. So just as Dick Gregory was my role model when I was running my first marathon, we want to provide role models for other individuals. So just as people didn't realize that Dick Gregory was a distance runner, people also didn't realize that Oscar Lee Brown, the actor, was a national distance running champion.
Is that right?
Yes.
Did not know that. Okay. That is some really great work. And I love that you're encouraging other people to run, that you're building camaraderie and a family there. And I mean, I'm always happy to hear about scholarship. If people want to learn, and I didn't realize that it was open to anyone who runs any distance. If people want to learn more about your association and where that next race will be, I mean, the idea that you're going to have a congregation, I mean, even for me, that's encouraging to know that I'm not going to be, the only one. How can they learn more about your association?
Yes, they can go to our website, which is blackmarathoners.org. We also have a Facebook group and a Facebook page. I encourage people to join the Facebook group because when they do that, they can get a lot of good information about distance running and about perhaps if they have injuries or if they're kind of unsure about training plans or programs. We have a lot of experienced runners there who are willing to help people.
Great. Sounds like you have some good engagement too. And I will drop those links in the show notes so that folks, whenever they're listening to this, can avail themselves of that and get involved with your group. A lot of people will be excited to learn about this, I'm sure, as I am. You've been doing this about 4 decades now, a little more or less. You gave your age, so I'm not giving it away. I'm curious. I know how my industry has changed tremendously just because of technology and materials and so forth. And I'm a dentist by training, as you know. I'm interested in how has running as a sport and as an industry changed since you began back in that 1982 first marathon in Cowtown, Fort Worth. Give another shout out to Fort Worth.
Oh gosh, when I look back at the photo from the first marathon, one of the things you'll notice is that I'm wearing a cotton t-shirt and cotton shorts.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have gone to the moisture wicking fabric. It's much lighter. It breathes better. It is such a huge, huge relief from what I used to wear when I was running. Also, when I started, we didn't have water bottles.
Oh, the cups.
Yeah, no, just the water bottles themselves that you see now. People, they put them around their waist. Yeah, we didn't have water bottles.
That's what I mean. I remember stopping at little stations, getting cups and kind of throwing it at yourself. Or did you not have anything?
Well, just for training purposes, for example.
I see. Okay.
But to your point, I was talking with a lady, African-American lady named Marilyn Bevins, who got second in the 1977 Boston Marathon. And she said they didn't have any aid stations during the race at all.
For 26.2 miles.
Yes, there was a man at the halfway point who gave her a cup of water.
Bless him.
And that's all she had to drink for the entire 26.2 miles.
Oh, my goodness.
So things have changed quite a bit. Also, back then, we didn't have GPS watches. In fact, we didn't even have watches that had timers.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't come along until probably 5 or 6 years after I started running.
What you mentioned the Boston Marathon, and I think everyone knows about, what happened there with the explosion just a few years ago. And I believe you were there at that race. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, I was supposed to be actually running a race, and I was able to give the entry to my bonus daughter. So while she was out running the race, we were at the finish line area waiting for her. And I realized I hadn't eaten any breakfast. So we stepped inside to a building. And we hadn't been in the building for 5 minutes before we heard two popping sounds. And when we ran out of the building, we realized we would have been directly across the street from the second explosion had we not gone in to grab a bite to eat.
Wow.
And so it was a mess down there, needless to say.
What I saw on television and just the anguish and, all of the people who were maimed, who weren't, killed, it was awful, a really, really horrific thing. And I'm glad that you and your bonus daughter and for all of the people who survived and the, emergency medical people and the police officers, the community really came together. There I have friends in Boston, and that was a tough time. I would think I would have had nightmares after that, witnessing that. And it's just way too much of that going on. But I'm glad that you made it through that experience okay. And we are a very resilient people and a resilient nation to just keep coming back strong and moving on from things like that. What about, I know what I wanted to ask is someone who's only done a few 5Ks, what were some of the things that you did, their learning experience for everything? I know the cotton t-shirt, but were there any other things that you did in the beginning that some of our listeners, some mistakes they might be able to avoid, some tips in terms of training in particular or equipment?
Yeah, there was a period of time, it was about a 2-year period of time where I kept getting injured. And I couldn't figure out why, but luckily I've been keeping a running journal. Mm-hmm. And what I realized was that I was putting too many miles on my shoes. So when I first started running, the bottom of the shoes would wear out rather quickly. And when the bottom of the shoe wore out is when you would go buy another pair. And also at the same time, the midsole and cushioning of the shoe would be wearing out. Well, then they started making shoes that didn't wear out as quickly on the bottom. So even though it wasn't worn out on the bottom, the cushioning of the shoe was just completely shot. And because that cushioning was shot and I was still running in the shoes, I kept getting injured.
Ah, okay.
So what I found for me, because of my weight, I still weigh over 200 pounds. I have to get rid of my running shoes every 250 to 300 miles. There are other people, most runners can usually run in a pair of shoes from 300 to 400 miles. So if I'm talking to someone and they're telling me, well, yeah, I'm having this problem with my calf, with my thigh, my Achilles, first question I ask is, how many miles do you have on your running shoes?
I think most people probably don't know if they're not professionals like yourself. So that is great information, good for me to know. And I'm just curious, though, if there's a rule of thumb for Jane and John like me, just hiking, walking around. I mean, I know to tell people you need to change your toothbrush about every 6 months. Is there like a generic rule of thumb? Because I have no idea. I have, sneakers is older than some of my grandchildren, athletic shoes. So as you talk, I'm thinking, well, surely by now they're 8 and 12 and 4. I probably put enough miles on it, but I have no way of really knowing nothing's hurting on me. So at what point, I know the youngsters, they get a new pair of kicks every year, but I'm not balling like that. I'm not doing that.
Well, when one of the things that I tell people is when people get injured, it's because they've violated one of the 3 twos. They either went too far, too fast, or too soon. Just because it may have taken a person 12 years to get out of shape, they shouldn't expect it to take them 12 days to get back in shape.
Right.
So they really need to slow it down and pace themselves. One of the things we always say in running is my race, my pace.
Mm-hmm.
So you go at your pace and not the pace of other people around you, because they may be going faster than you should be going. So it's really important that they listen to their bodies. I discourage people from wearing headphones or listening to things while they're outside running. If they're in a treadmill, it's all right.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're outdoors running, you should be listening to what's going on around you, and also just kind of focus on your breathing and what you're doing.
That all makes sense. I like that. And I like, you said my race, my pace.
Yes.
That sounds like something I would say in an empowerment seminar that applies to so much more than just running. Sometimes we forget that the main person we're competing with is ourselves. And for me, my goal is just to be a better person than I was yesterday, than I was a year ago, than I was 10 years ago. And that is success for me. And we each define that for our lane. So I really, really like that bit of advice, that idiom. And in terms of life lessons and applying them more broadly, what are some of the life lessons that we can learn from running or sports? In fact, you've written a book that I haven't had an opportunity to read yet, From the Road Race to the Rat Race, that was published last year. Congratulations, 2020. So it may be things that you excerpt from there. If so, it's available on Amazon, folks, and look for it, Mr. Tony Reed. But if you'll share some tips with us just in general.
Okay, well, there are a lot of things you can take from running and apply to life. So, for example, my mantra is hills build character. So I always look at a challenge, so to speak, as a character builder. Also, it's important not to overcommit yourself, not to overextend yourself. When I was talking about the 3 twos going too far, too fast, too soon, it's important to pace yourself, know what you're capable of doing, because you're going to be running this race by yourself. So self-care is critical. You have to know when to start, and you also have to know when to stop. There's a saying out there where they say, just do it. Well, my thing is just do it, but have a plan. Don't just jump in, have a plan, lay it all out. Also, running is very meditative or very reflective. Like I've run over 47,000 miles. I have probably only run 2 miles of that wearing headphones. The rest of the time, I'm really thinking about myself and truly looking inward, evaluating things I've done in the past, make plans for things in the future. Also use that as an opportunity to talk with God while I'm running. So, I'll be out there by myself. I'm surrounded by the nature and the beauty and things that God has created, and use it as a time to thank Him for it.
That is a beautiful thing and a good time to do it, using your natural abilities in nature and to reflect upon the creator of it all. I think is very, very appropriate. And you're right, we don't spend enough time in self-reflection and introspection, and exercise is a great time to do it. And that's important to keep in mind, because we don't get a lot of times by ourselves where nobody's talking to us or demanding anything from us. So it makes perfect sense. Well, it's been really great talking to you. You've got, like I said, just a wealth of stories and experiences. I mean, we could go through every continent and talk about it if we had the time. But as we do not, I would like to give you the opportunity to share anything else, anything upcoming, like for folks to know about you and your organization.
Okay, thank you. Well, one of the things that I also like to tell people is that running has an economic impact on the people doing the running, because when you run or you walk, you are creating a healthier you. And that means you end up spending less money on medicine. You're not spending money on high blood pressure, hypertension, diabetes, all of what have sometimes been termed the diseases of inactivity. And you can take that money that you would have spent on medicine and use it for other things. I like to say running shoes are cheaper than insulin.
Right.
The running shoes don't come with a warning label on them. There are very limited negative side effects associated with it. And all the money that I would have spent on insulin all these years is what I've been using to travel all around the world. So
fantastic. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Again, I've had the opportunity to share this space today with Mr. Tony Reed, who, again, has the distinction of being the first Black to have run on all 7 continents in the world. And you can hear the perseverance, the discipline, and the optimism that has contributed to his success. So really, really grateful for your time, Tony Reed. I know you got a lot going on, and I want to invite you back to the show after you set some more milestones, because I know they're coming. So I'm just going to speak that into existence and put the invitation with it.
Well, thank you. I look forward to it.
Very good. Thank you for listening to Perpetual Motion with Dr. Mo Anderson. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're new to my podcast, please subscribe to us on Pandora, Google, Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, so you'll be notified about new episodes. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you do share this episode to social media, remember to tag me at Dr. Mo Anderson. Now go, renew, review, and renew. Smooches.